All right, and we are live. Welcome, guys. We are doing the first of our episodes previewing the Strange Realities Conference and the speakers that we are going to have there. And we are very excited in the next like little bit of time to have Dr. Stephen Finley.
Good evening.
And good evening, sir. And David Metcalfe.
Howdy.
And Jose Herrera is hanging out with us as well.
Órale, ¿qué pasa?
Hello, sir. All right, guys. We're gonna do a little segment here, just kind of talking about you guys' different presentations at the Strange Realities Conference, what you guys are going to be talking about, and just kind of give a little bit everybody kind of like a little teaser, a little preview of what we are going to be doing October 15th through the 17th here in Nashville, Tennessee, which you can see on the green screen behind me. There's our little insignia right there.
That's not a green screen. We are in the Strange Realities dimension.
Oh yeah. We're in the middle of a void right now. So I guess we'll start with you, Dr. Finley, about what you're going to be talking about at Strange Realities. And you are going to be, I will pull it up here, but we'll tell everybody when you're going to be talking here in just a second. But please tell us what you're going to be talking about at the conference.
Well, first of all, I think I'm the happiest one on this call because I got my audio working, and I can now hear everybody. So I'm just super excited. I'm looking at what I think will probably be Minister Louis Farrakhan's last and greatest speech, which he delivered on July 4th, 2020, on the 90th anniversary of the Nation of Islam. It was a speech, I think actually David may have listened to the speech. If not, he's read some of what might be in my presentation. It's what I think was the most universal voice and presentation that the public who has a chance to hear it would have ever heard from Minister Farrakhan. It's not a surprise to me. He talks about the pandemic and vaccinations and all those really good controversial subjects. But the interesting thing, I think, in addition to its universality, the scope of people who he talks about, including women's rights, LGBTQ rights, all kinds of things that people don't expect from Minister Farrakhan because of his public image, which I know better. And yet he says that everything he's been teaching for the last 30 years, he got from this mother wheel, this UFO on the sky, to which he believes he's going to return soon. And I think both of those ideas are really interesting, that what he's taught for the last 30 years, including this last speech, which was, again, a very universal tone, talking about justice on the planet and peace on the planet. And this idea that he's going to return to this mother wheel, which, according to him, in the Nation of Islam is inhabited by his mentor, Elijah Muhammad, and the creator of this vehicle, Master Fard Muhammad. I think those two things are really interesting because the latter suggests that, at least for him, he's suggesting some survival after death, bodily. And I just think that's a really interesting notion that he connects at least his life after death, or his life, and we can't even call it death because he's saying he's not going to die. He's going to be translated or depart to the mother wheel. And what he's taught the public for 30 years, he attributes both to this UFO.
Okay, that's drawing on some of your work that you've done on this, and we actually had you on for an episode about this. I guess that was in the summer of 2020. We talked about that. Real fascinating, interesting stuff, and some aspects of all that I really just did not know.
Yeah, and I think what's different about this that I want to connect to his contention that he got all of this from the will is the universality of this presentation. That's what's going to shock people, I think. They've never heard this kind of stuff based on the representations of Minister Farrakhan in the media. They've never heard him talk about women's rights, LGBTQ rights, speaking about love for a Jewish comedian, Chelsea Handler, calling a white Catholic from Chicago, Father Flager, his brother in Christ. And all of this, he says, he got from this UFO experience. That's what I want to communicate to folks, that he connects all of this to this experience, as well as his survival after whatever happens to his body. We'll have to talk about that.
Well, like your work has been it's so fascinating because a lot of people in the UFO field, they don't necessarily equate Farrakhan or that movement with UFOs, and they don't really talk about it. And here you are, you're a professor of religion.
That's
and
right.
you are talking about the UFO subject in the context of a religion, which I think is probably one of the most important ways to really look at the UFO subject as a variety of religious experience, which I think it really is. And especially when you get into the contact and abduction experience, I think that's really what you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, thank you. And I don't want to take up all the time, but with regard to your point, the Nation of Islam says we need to be talking to them about UFOs because they say they hold the key to the real identity and meaning of UFOs. And they say they were first in the modern UFO era.
And that's probably one of the biggest UFO religions in America, at least.
It is. And even though I've used the term UFO religion too, I don't know how they would feel about that. I've probably used that term in conversation with David. I know I've used it before. Mm-hmm. They just say the main ideas of the Nation of Islam come from what we would understand as a UFO, what they call the mother wheel. And so in the sense that UFO religions, for these religious movements, UFOs are central. In that sense, they could be understood and recast as a UFO religion. And to your point, they're not understood in that way by hardly anyone, but me and a few other people.
Right.
They've actually started to do more outreach too since the government report came out. I've seen on Twitter they've actually been doing like outreach to ufologists and saying, "Hey, we want to open up a conversation here," which is
that's right.
Very interesting.
That's right. And the government should be talking to them, but they said the government won't talk to them because they hold the key to what's really going on with UFOs.
Right. And we should also mention that we're recording this 4 days after the 17th, right? Which was a visionary moment in, was it 1985?
1985, September 17th, 1985. I'll let you continue.
Yeah, well, and that was when Minister Farrakhan had his visionary experience where he was taken up into the mother wheel in Mexico.
That's right.
On a mountaintop, which is interesting because at Adamski, also, I don't know how close that site is that Farrakhan was at to where Adamski had a kind of base of operations for a long time.
And I also think there's some time frame overlap too. Wasn't that the early 30s, 1934?
No, Adamski would have been the 50s.
It would have been the 50s. Okay. Yeah. Again, the Nation of Islam says they were first.
Yeah. Well, in the 30s, it's interesting. There's a recent case that I think Lou Elizondo had brought up, or Mick Millen from the Debrief had just mentioned it, but a case in 1933, supposedly in Italy. And so I think that their Nation of Islam, the date for Elijah Muhammad
was July 30th, July 4th, 1930.
Right.
And they said that Elijah Muhammad, that Master Fard Muhammad began teaching Elijah Muhammad about the mother wheel maybe a year later when he joined the movement, so 1931 or so.
Right.
Now again, this is their narrative. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen the historical documentation of this, the writings and so on, but this is the Nation of Islam's narrative.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that, Dr. Finley. And of course, you are going to be streaming from home. You're going to be one of the ones streaming into the conference, I guess we could call it.
On the mother wheel.
Yeah.
Hey, I'd like to go. I'd like to go too. I just don't want to stay there. I just want to see what it's all about and come back home.
And you're going to be doing your presentation on the 16th on that Saturday. That is from 11:35 a.m. to 12:35 p.m. That is Central Time. So if you are streaming the conference and you are in another time zone, adapt accordingly to that. So I want to go to Jose. Jose has also been on Conspiranormal. Everybody that is involved with this conference has been on Conspiranormal at least once. So Jose, you were on with us last year as well, I think towards the end of the year. And I think your presentation is going to be as equally fascinating.
Yeah, it does have it's a long-term project, at least within the mental health paradigm, but this topic is on a small portion of a book project that I've been working on for the past 4 years, a lot more intimately, which is basically a project that started back when I got out in 2011 through my wartime experiences. But the topic is on meta war, and meta war is just basically the ultimate form of human destruction. A little bit more detailed portion of it is it's the collapse of temporal limits, the overcoming of spatial projection, and the incapacitation of epigenomic institutional mimetic viability by the use of kinetic and non-kinetic systems. So one of the more pertinent issues that we face today is what I call epigenetic, mimetic, and social entropy, essentially as a result of digital affective states or atmospheres generated by nation states who have corrupted our ecosystem. Our mental health has, as a population, has gotten a lot more entropic, essentially a lot more disorganized. And basically what I make it akin to or analogous to is imagine providing some type of therapy to a opioid user, giving them the proper tools and assessments, but then taking that person or allowing that person to go back into the same zones where those same drugs are. And that's essentially what has taken place as a result of what I would call artificial traumas as a result of attacks. And more specifically, when you begin to look at what Russia did between 2013 and what they're currently doing in terms of sowing division by creating sock puppet farms, or what the Chinese Communist Party is doing, and more recently, FireEye cybersecurity firm released an assessment where pro-People Republic of China, basically they have infiltrated 40 social media sites where they have hundreds and thousands of fake accounts, and basically they're pushing specific types of narrative. And those narratives range from creating false atmospheres where there's portions of, or there's just Asian American hate. They're trying to mobilize people. They're putting in false memes or narratives regarding COVID-19. And what it's doing is it's exploiting some of the more intimate cultural issues that we face today. And as a result of it, all it's doing is contributing to more of the division that we see today. So if you look at the 2019-2020 DoD publications, they did a large assessment of young adults, and they said, hey, look, you know, individuals between 19 to 24, about 60% of them have low IQs. They're too obese to serve in any type of capacity. Long term, when you decide to conduct influence operations on a massive scale, if you're to incapacitate the HPA axis, which has access to the pituitary gland and the adrenal glands, high levels of cortisol, high levels of adrenaline, essentially shrink the gray matter in the brain. And over time, it leads to chronic illnesses. It leads to more mental health deviations. And essentially, it disrupts entire markets along with the institutions that run off of those markets. So what we're facing today is unprecedented, and no one really at the national security apparatus, minus a few folks, is linking the mental health aspects to narrative warfare and mimetic warfare. And essentially, narrative warfare is the conflict between the meaning of information, and then mimetic warfare is kind of like the ideas, the stories that make up the narrative. And you can basically deconstruct any master narrative as a result of manipulating specific types of information from a story or from a master narrative. And we've kind of seen that today. Not to get too political, but we see that mainly within the Democratic and the Republican side of things.
Yeah, you're really pointing out that evolution of warfare that I think is really important for people to understand, no matter where you're at politically. And it's real pioneering stuff, Jose. And we really are fascinated by it, and we want to bring it to our audience in this conference for sure.
Yeah, it's I'm really looking forward to seeing this presentation.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
So because it is important, because I think that just like with all the disinformation and misinformation that is going on right now, and how people really need to understand that a lot of what is happening is in many ways just a way to just kill Americans by our enemies. And it's just a new kind of psychological warfare, essentially. And I want to point out too, Jose, that you are also a religious. You have, I guess, you're in a graduate program for religious studies right now, and you're studying with she's Dr. Walsh now.
Yeah, no. So I graduated. I have a dual degree in philosophy and religion. I have a crap ton of certifications, and I'm going back to get a degree, a master's, but more so an MFA. Because part of my nonfiction work has a lot of science fiction in order to basically write out the future. And that's kind of my objective, is to present the Department of Defense with a new mental health paradigm, not just for service members, but also to the civilian population, which really you have to tie in both. You can't have one without the other. And I met Dr. Walsh back in 2014, and ever since then, she's taken me under her wing, and I've learned a lot. I think I mentioned to Dave I'm a Pasulkian, and I've had the distinct pleasure of having my mind kind of, let's just say the veil has lifted, and I see a lot clearly. Most of my work started as a result of the very real reality for a lot of service members, which is suicide. Within my unit, I think there's been over 50 suicides, and for the 03 field or the infantry field, that's a really significant number. And as you know, the studies back from 1994 with the CDC, all of this is a social contagion. And just to paint a real picture here, there's 51.5 million people with any mental illness in the United States. If I wanted to exploit a civilian population center and cause severe mayhem, that's the population that I would focus on. And these are the numbers that are right now essentially put into some statistical format. We're not talking about the people who haven't been registered or haven't seen a doctor. So the reality of things becoming a lot more chaotic is only a matter of time, because we're transitioning right now into a 5G environment, which is all about the smart city, not about the smartphone.
And I want to bring up this that we were talking a little bit before we started, that I was watching this thing on Hulu called The Devil You Know, and I want to talk a little bit more about it, maybe like a Patreon episode or something. But this basically both seasons, one has to do with this guy Pazuzu Algarad, the supposed Satanist that killed a couple of guys and buried him in the backyard, and then the second season is all about this lady Sherry Shriner. And I will just, from the point of view of these like documentaries, that like mental health is extremely important, because really that's kind of what it comes down to, is a lot of people whose mental health has just gone completely untreated.
Yeah.
And actually one of the people that's portrayed, and is actually portrayed very well in the first season, is actually an Iraq war veteran. But you know, you can tell, you know, he admits that he has PTSD and all these type of things, and it's very revealing of just like the kind of abysmal state of mental health in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. I have one more point to make, and then I'll keep my mouth shut. There are adaptive therapies. There are solutions to what's happening. And there's a very fringe thought. It's not fringe between us. And I talked a lot with David intimately regarding it, but we can use soft psychism in order to prevent suicide and mental health degradation. We use psi in the battle space. There are programs that have been conducted, which we use to hunt. And those same programs can be retrofitted in a mental health format with an encrypted information ecosystem and the technologies. The problem is that if we don't change the course of action within the next decade or so, we're not going to bounce back.
Yeah.
And that's all interconnected with this whole phenomena.
That's very sobering, Jose. Does anybody have anything to add to what Jose is talking about?
Well, I think that, you know, especially for the conspiranormal audience, that it's incredibly important, because one of the battle spaces that have been opened up is the, you know, not only the conspiracy culture, but also the paranormal culture. All of these topics are targets, and they're also spaces, right? Like there's space where these narratives are driven into, because if you hit the outside, if you hit the fringe, it ripples back into the mainstream, and you may not be able to hit the mainstream directly, but if you hit these fringe areas, it will come in. And we've seen that in the past, you know, 4 or 5 years, that you know, QAnon and a bunch of these movements that seemed inconceivable a decade ago, that they would gain, you know, such a mass following to the point where, you know, people's grandmas were on the White House lawn. You know, I mean, that was not something that you could have foreseen. And I think that, you know, just looking back at the past, you know, 5 years at least, right? But then you've got to think of the buildup that was going to lay the seeds for that. We're seeing this happen in, you know, what Jose had pointed out as a kinetic space, where it's now becoming mobilized in people's lives, in people's actions, you know, and in the reaction. So, you know, the presentation that he's going to give, I think, is incredibly important as a tool for people who are living, or, you know, that have their mind space in these areas. You know, I mean, especially with the way that the UFO topic has become more mainstreamed and that kind of thing. So, you know, Jose provides tools and kind of a perspective that's really important, you know, in the real world of where these things exist, you know, not necessarily in the kind of fun role-playing sense of the cultures, you know, but actually what the long-term effects of this stuff are.
And I want to point out that Jose is going to be giving his presentation on all this. So we find out on my notes here. Sunday morning, the 17th. That is going to be 9:15 a.m. to 10:15 a.m. That's when Jose Herrera is going to be speaking. And that, again, is United States Central Time. So for the online people that are actually going to be there. Sorry, Jose, to put you so early on a Sunday morning.
Oh no, man! I'm usually up by 2 a.m. every morning.
Yeah, and you might actually be. I think you're going to be in New Mexico, so I think you're going to be like an actual hour behind that. So let's get to Mr. Metcalfe here finally and talk about his presentation, which we kind of got a review of in our Patreon hangout, a preview of.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about star seeds. So after the heavy stuff of Dr. Finley and Jose, but actually, it's nice to have Jose and Dr. Finley on here, because the presentation that I did on the Zoom call was kind of like my initial research into the topic of the sort of starseed narrative. And it touched on some of the stuff that, I think that Dr. Finley talks about in terms of the Nation of Islam being a little bit different than the way that people think, and Jose's discussing these concepts of narrative warfare. And both of those areas, I think, are something that I want to delve into with kind of what I touched on with the origin of this concept of the starseed, which is a cultural movement and a narrative in which the idea is that there's certain people among us who are, either reincarnated or walk in from another star system, or are, actually physically have, manifested from these extraterrestrial races or multidimensional races. The presentation that I gave on the Zoom thing, kind of the rough draft of this presentation, I looked at sort of the history of the narrative build. One of the things I didn't touch on, though, was the importance of the starseed narrative in Black culture. You think of someone like George Clinton, right? Like in the Parliament Funkadelic and the Mothership, right? Or, Sun Ra, who embodies this starseed narrative in a completely unique way, which actually predates and anticipates the ways that SRI and some of the folks that were aligned with the psychic warfare program in the 70s would envision the starseed narrative, and Timothy Leary as well with his starseed transmission, but as sort of a force for cultural change, as a way for the human to move forward into this next age, and so I really want to kind of delve into the different ways that that's been expressed, because right now we see it in a very specific way. There's a very specific sort of starseed narrative that's within the sort of neo-new age movement, and that, but there's different ways that it can be viewed, even within hip-hop culture. There's a lot of hip-hop artists that draw on what's essentially a starseed narrative. And there's an interesting way that goes back to New Thought and, books like the Kabbalion, and William Walker Atkinson's New Thought, which heavily influenced some of the 5%er movement. And the Circle 7 Quran comes out of some New Thought roots. There's a lot of these different interesting cultural tie-ins. And in terms of what Jose is talking about, I definitely want to address the way that, when people at within the SRI circle were talking about this and talking with, folks associated with the Institute of Noetic Science and Brad Steiger, who wrote some of the kind of key 1980s books that centralized this concept of the starseed from very divergent sources. That narrative that they were looking at with the starseed was a weaponized narrative and a defense narrative, in the sense that they saw it as a way to reprogram humanity. So something like the Changing Images of Man project, the starseed narrative was a part of that thinking, and if we see those possibilities in it, someone like Sun Ra becomes really fascinating, because he saw those possibilities as well, but he actually embodied them in a way that we don't see with a lot of sort of the contemporary cultural examples of the starseed narrative. Sun Ra lived the experience in a way that, you know, if you read his poetry, if you listen to his music, if you've ever seen the orchestra play, you know, the orchestra is still around. And if you hear the guys who played with Sun Ra, like this wasn't cosplay. You know, this was actually a very viable way of being that he embodied. And, you know, I'm from Chicago, and Phil Coren, who played with the orchestra, still teaches in Chicago and runs community groups. You know, and I saw the orchestra perform in Millennium Park, and it's outrageous. I mean, you can't even imagine the feeling that comes from this music. And this was music that Sun Ra said was, you know, channeled from space. You know, it was channeled from Saturn. It was channeled, and it was here to heal the world. So I'm going to look at the different ways that, you know, there's that example of Starseed, and then there's something like, you know, New Age channels selling nutritional health stuff on Instagram, you know, and a little bit different, you know, doesn't quite have the same community and cultural focus. So I'm excited to be on tonight with Jose and Dr. Finley, because their work has really inspired me. And also, I think, you know, specifically for this presentation, is going to inspire a kind of different angle on the topic.
Very good.
Cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anything to add to that, Dr. Finley? And
No, I just really like what David is doing, and we've talked a little bit about it, and I just love the project, and I'm looking forward to hearing the fuller version of it. I'll be in his session as well.
And I want to point out that David is actually going to be in Nashville at Strange Realities, and he is going to be presenting at 10:25 a.m. to 11:25 a.m., and that is also Central Time. So adjust your calendars, clocks accordingly. And actually, real quick, we have somebody that actually asked a question. This may be more your expertise, Dr. Finley, but it says, into the Nation of Islam and Scientology in communication with each other and doing some sort of exchange. We may have mentioned this whenever we spoke when I had you on the last time. So
yeah, we did. They're actually an official relationship, and so I don't know as much about the intricacies of Scientology. Maybe some folks, maybe David, maybe Jose, maybe one of you can help me unpack it. But they actually have an official relationship where Scientology is training members of the Nation of Islam. There are hundreds now who are auditors. And the purpose of them learning auditing or being certified or whatever the term is in Scientology is to use as another tool to help break the sort of mental oppression. I'm not sure what the parallels are in what Jose was talking about, but they do see Scientology as a means to help break through some of the mental health issues, the self-hatred, and so on that comes from, you know, living in an anti-Black white supremacist world. And that's how they understand their relationship with Scientology. Mr. Farrakhan said if it helps, he's open to it.
all right. Well, I want to, David, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, with the auditing, it uses a biofeedback device. So it actually does have a very physical aspect to it in terms of they're monitoring what people's emotional responses are. You know, so Jose had been talking about, you know, cortisol levels and the actual changes in the physical makeup. And the e-meters allow you to see that and allow you to actually interact with that and start to retrain the way that you interact with it. And they also have a lot of different, you know, people call it brainwashing techniques, but, you know, I mean, they're essentially meditation techniques and different techniques for reprogramming the self and the sense of self, you know. So
and this intersection between the Nation of Islam and Scientology is one that hasn't gotten a lot of attention in scholarship. Mm-hmm. It's not one that I planned on pursuing, but if I ever have the opportunity to interview Minister Farrakhan, which could be in the works, I've asked members of the Nation of Islam about it, including a prominent member of his research department who said he's going to try to arrange it. It didn't work out in 2007, 2008. I'm hoping it works out, because if it does, David and the rest of you, I have to ask these questions about Scientology, because I don't know a lot about it. And there isn't, I'm not sure there's been an article on it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, at SIR Nashville is actually right next door to the Nashville Scientology Celebrity Center.
Yes.
So if you want to go next door and get e-metered, then you probably can.
All right.
Or a free personality test, as they say.
Very good. I'll take one.
All right. Well, gentlemen, starting with you, Dr. Finley, please tell everybody where they can find you guys, what you have available online, and any books that you guys want to promote.
Well, I'm the inaugural chair of the Department of African and African American Studies at LSU. It just became a department this year, so they can find me on AAAS at LSU. If they just Google that, I'll come up. I'm about to post a new bio, intellectual bio that I just had to write for someone at Rice University, Dr. William Parsons, who asked me to write it for a project he's working on. And so that'll tell you about my books. But very quickly, my book, In and Out of This World, Material and Extraterrestrial Bodies in the Nation of Islam, is now in production, finally, with Duke University Press. I've been working on it and working with them since 2017. It'll be out next year, and I'm really looking forward to that. I also have a really interesting article that I'd love for folks to take a look at in December in the Journal of American Academy of Religion. It's supposed to appear. It's an interpretation of an African American who's born in the late 19th century, named Robert T. Brown, born near Austin, Texas, the son of former slaves, who may have been a progenitor of the Harlem Renaissance, became a physicist, in quotes, a physicist and an occultist, wrote the book, The Nature of Space, in 1919, had to conceal his race to get it published. It was reviewed by mathematicians and physicists in actual scientific and mathematical journals. And he's really arguing for a sort of mystical notion of reality in his interpretation, his use of non-Euclidean geometry and physics and the occult to frame this notion of reality. And I'm using his work to think through theory of religion. And so in the December version of the Journal of American Academy of Religion, there is a roundtable on theosophy and the study of religion. Robert T. Brown was a theosophist for a short while. And that article are some of my preliminary thoughts of sort of the intersections of race, blackness, the occult, and quantum physics in theory of religion.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Finley.
Sounds fascinating.
Jose, where can people find you?
You can find me on Facebook, Instagram. On Facebook, I go by an honor name. It's called Lewena. My last name, Herrera, which is Herrera. That's where I do some of my postings. And then on Instagram, I post up my podcast, which is the O3XX series, where we use internarrative identity as a mental health tool. We talk about mental health, national security matters, and just breaking bread with old team guys.
Okay.
Awesome.
And Mr. Metcalfe.
Yes. davidmetcalfe.wordpress.com. You can go there and buy t-shirts, lots of them, or stickers.
Like the one Jose is wearing.
Like the one Jose is wearing, exactly. The saucers will keep their secrets. I'm on Twitter as David B. Metcalfe, and Instagram, I believe it's Liminal Analytics. But yeah, you have a lot of articles out. I also am the editor-in-chief for the Threshold Journal of Interdisciplinary Consciousness Studies, which is out of the Windbridge group, Windbridge Institute, Windbridge Research Center. they have an afterlife symposium that will be posting soon, which should be fairly interesting. Their specialty is in mediumship and afterlife studies and applied psi. So that will be, take a look. I don't know exactly where they'll be posting that, probably on one of the Windbridge sites. So be on the lookout for the Afterlife Symposium from Windbridge.
All right.
Perfect.
Well, thanks
All right.
everybody. These are some of the presentations I'm looking forward to the most.
Yep.
And you can catch them, everybody, at Strange Realities again, October 15th through the 17th, online and in person. We might be all sold out by now.
We are not all sold out at this moment.
For the in-person.
There are some, the in-person. There are still some slots left. Remember, if you are coming in person, we are requiring vaccine cards or proof of a negative COVID test just to keep everybody safe. And but there are some of those available, but there are plenty of online $30 tickets available. So please, if you guys are interested in any of these presentations, we are going to be streaming them and to a private Facebook group, just like we did last year, except it's going to be in a widely different setting than we did last time.
StrangeRealitiesConference.com. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.